week 3 of our series on Judges, and I told you that this book is crazy. And so far, we have talked about a guy pooping his pants, a woman driving a tent peg through the temple of a villain, and who knows what we're going to talk about tonight. So let's recap real quick before we dig in. If you remember, Judges was written around 3,000 years ago, and it's in the in-between time, the time after Joshua's death and the time before Israel had a king. Judges 21:25, if you remember, says this, and it sums up all of the book of Judges. In those days, Israel had no king. All the people did whatever seemed right in their own eyes. It was a lawless time. It was essentially Israel's Wild West. It was a dangerous time, and making it worse, the Israelites kept diving deeper into their sin. God would punish them for breaking their covenant with him, allow them to be conquered, and then when they repented, God would raise up a judge to lead them back to God and freedom from their enemies. It was a cycle that was repeated so many times in the book of Judges. Tonight, we are going to talk about the last judge, Samson, found in Judges chapter 13 through 16. And Samson reminds me of Billy the Kid. You've all heard of him, right? He's perhaps the most popular Old West outlaw. Here's what I find fascinating about Billy the Kid, is we treat him like he's a hero. And again, one of my favorite Western movies, y'all saw a clip from this earlier, is Young Guns. It has Billy the Kid as the star, and I find myself hating the lawmen that are chasing him and the rest of the regulators. But the reality is, he was a bad dude bent on revenge, who was ultimately taken down by someone he thought of as a friend, Pat Garrett. Which brings me to Samson. He's kind of a popular Sunday school story, isn't he? And how many of you went and saw Samson at the Sight and Sound theaters? You know what I'm talking about then. The guy with the long hair who may have made a few mistakes. He is betrayed by the love of his life, and in the end, he turns back to God and dies, wiping out the enemy, right? Sounds like a heroic journey to me, except the child-friendly story is not quite accurate. So let's begin reading tonight. If you have your Bibles, you can turn to Judges chapter 13. If not, it will be on the screen for you. But let's begin reading in Judges chapter 13 and verse 1. Again, the Israelites did evil in the Lord's sight. So the Lord handed them over to the Philistines, who oppressed them for 40 years. In those days, a man named Manoah from the tribe of Dan lived in the town of Zorah. His wife was unable to become pregnant, and they had no children. Did you notice what was missing? Each of the previous times when the Israelites did evil, eventually they cried out to God for help. But now they have gone so far away from God, even after 40 years of being conquered, they didn't turn to God. It gives us a hint of where this story is going to go. The angel of the Lord appeared to Manoah's wife and said, "Even though you have been unable to have children, you will soon become pregnant and give birth to a son. So be careful, you must not drink wine or any other alcoholic drink, nor eat any forbidden food. You will become pregnant and give birth to a son, and his hair must never be cut, for he will be dedicated to God as a Nazirite from birth. He will begin to rescue Israel from the Philistines." So even with no cry for help, God still decided to send a rescuer to his people. And Samson's origin story leads the reader to believe that he is going to be the hero, that he would be a Nazirite, sets the stage for readers to think that Samson was important. Now, what's a Nazirite? Oh, I'm glad you asked. Basically, it was a vow to commit one's life to God, to God's service, to be an important agent of God, to be set apart in a special way. It was a big deal. But the story is off almost immediately. Samson's father didn't believe the mom initially, and chapter 13 is a lot of that back and forth drama. We get to chapters 14 and 15. Well, that's where the soap opera drama really starts to ramp up. And here are some of the highlights, or maybe I should say lowlights, from Judges chapter 14 and 15. See, Samson saw the Philistine named Timnah and ordered his parents to go get her for me because he said, she looks good to me. Samson rips a lion's jaw apart with his bare hands. He loses a bet and he kills 30 men to get revenge. He called his soon-to-be wife a heifer and accused her and the men of being unfaithful, and he left her at the altar. When he found out that Timnah's father let her marry someone else, he ties torches to 300 foxes and burns down the Philistines' grain fields for revenge. And when the Philistines put Timnah and her father to death for this, Samson gets mad and he kills many of them. The Philistines are now outraged and prepared to attack the Israelites, so the Israelites instead hand over Samson to the Philistines. It was a trap. Samson broke free and he kills 1,000 Philistines with the jawbone of a donkey. Then Samson spends the night with a prostitute. So we quickly get the sense that all Samson cared about was himself and revenge. He broke all the Nazirite vows over and over. And then he meets Delilah. Turn over to Judges chapter 16, and we'll begin in verse 4. So sometime later, Samson fell in love with a woman named Delilah, who lived in the valley of Sorek. The rulers of the Philistines went to her and said, entice Samson to tell you what makes him so strong and how he can be overpowered and tied up securely. Then each of us will give you 1,100 pieces of silver. So Delilah said to Samson, please tell me what makes you so strong and what it would take to tie you up securely. So this begins a strange game of cat and mouse. Now some like to vilify Delilah, but if we're honest, both had selfish motives. And I'll just say this, that their story, it was not a love story, okay? Delilah was loyal to her people and wanted the money. Samson already had a pattern of using one woman after the other. In his eyes, they were just objects to him. Over the following verses, as he continues to sleep with her, she pressed him about the secret of his strength. And he would lie to her. He would make up ways of her trapping him, which she would try, but he would escape right before the Philistines would arrive. Jump down to verse 15. Then Delilah pouted. How can you tell me I love you when you don't share your secrets with me? You've made fun of me 3 times now, and you still haven't told me what makes you so strong. She tormented him with her nagging day after day until he was sick to death of it. Finally, Samson shared his secret with her. My hair has never been cut, he confessed, for I was dedicated to God as a Nazirite from birth. If my head were shaved, my strength would leave me, and I would become as weak as anyone else. Billy the Kid was killed by a guy named Pat Garrett. Check out this photo from 1880. Billy the Kid is the second one from the left, and Pat Garrett is the one on the far right. They were friends and even had nicknames together. Garrett was nicknamed Big Casino, and Billy the Kid was nicknamed Little Casino. They were Old West BFFs, if you would put it that way. But then Garrett was elected sheriff and went after his outlaw friend. Did his friendship play into him being able to beat Billy the Kid? Who knows? Delilah's connection with Samson certainly did. What happened after these verses is no surprise to the reader. Samson's head is shaved while he slept. The Philistines came in. They captured him. They gouged out his eyes, and they put him in prison. So why did he tell her? Why would he tell her this? Who knows? I don't think that he actually believed that she cared for him, or maybe how many times he had answered her question. Maybe he thought that, you know what, if I really do tell her the truth, maybe she just won't think it's the truth or believe me. Honestly, I think that he was so arrogant that he had escaped danger so many times before, that his strength had saved him over and over, that like the boxer who goes for one fight too many, that he was overconfident. He was too selfish to have it occur to him that he might fall. Well, time goes by. His hair begins to grow back. And then at a massive party at the Philistine temple with 3,000 people celebrating, he was brought out as the entertainment and chained between the two pillars supporting the temple. Let's continue reading in verse 28. Then Samson prayed to the Lord, "Sovereign Lord, remember me again, O God. Please strengthen me just one more time. With one blow, let me pay back the Philistines for the loss of my two eyes." Then Samson put his hands on the two center pillars that held up the temple. Pushing against them with both hands, he prayed, "Let me die with the Philistines." And the temple crashed down on the Philistine rulers and all the people. So he killed more people when he died than he had during his entire lifetime. And this is why he is often painted as a hero. In his final moments, he prayed to God to defeat the Philistines. But was he really a hero? As a judge, God had given him strength to lead his people back to God and freedom from the Philistines. But did he do either of those things? The story ends with the Israelites still enslaved to the Philistines. Saving Israel was never Samson's goal. Look at his prayer again in verse 28. It says this, "Let me pay back the Philistines for the loss of my two eyes." Nothing to do about saving Israel. His motive was revenge. Even in the end, he only cared for himself, and consequently, not only did he ignore the opportunity to serve God, nothing changed for the Israelites. Samson was Israel's last judge. The remaining few chapters of Judges record things just getting worse and worse. Israel's Wild West was a dark story that just got darker. Now you may think, what a depressing end to a sermon series. Maybe. However, I do believe that there are a few things that we can learn from Samson's story. So what is the first thing that we can learn from Samson's story? Number one is this: apathy is deadly. Apathy is deadly. What is apathy? I'm glad you asked again. The dictionary defines apathy as a lack of feeling or emotion, a lack of interest or concern. Samson and the Israelites just did not care about God. Remember at the beginning when I pointed out that the Israelites didn't ask God for help? They didn't even seem to want to be delivered. Samson had incredible potential, but he didn't seem to care either. Maybe they all thought that they would get good with God eventually, but for now they wanted to enjoy how things were. I don't know how you can enjoy captivity, but maybe they didn't think that it was important or it was urgent to get right with God. This isn't a problem unique with them. We do it today when we put off doing the right thing, when we don't bother praying, when we don't bother studying the Bible. Let me give you a little bit of wisdom wrapped up in a warning. We may say that God is important to us, but if our actions don't back it up, we reveal that we don't really have an interest or a concern for God. And just like that indifference led to horrible consequences back then, it can have ramifications for us today. As apathy is deadly. Number 2 that I think we can learn from Samson's story is that selfishness is deadly. Selfishness is deadly. Samson is the epitome of selfishness. Whether it was with women, things he wanted, his own safety, his desire for revenge. Even in his death, his focus was on revenge, not saving his people. And it didn't save his people. Now, Samson is such an extreme story, but it does give us a warning. Selfishness is a trap. We may justify it as looking out for ourselves, but really, it's putting what we want ahead of others. It's the opposite of what Jesus calls us to do, isn't it? Philippians chapter 2, verses 3 and 4 says this: don't be selfish. Right off the bat. Don't try to impress others. Be humble, thinking of others as better than yourselves. Don't look out only for your own interests, but take an interest in others too. Countercultural to what we are taught today. We are here to put others first. Hopefully we can all think of someone that is like this. They would be great to be around. It would be fun to be around them. Could you imagine what the world would look like if we all did this? If we all did this in the youth group? Could you imagine what that would look like? If we did this in our church? Guys, being like Christ is being the opposite of selfish. So apathy is deadly. Selfishness is deadly. And number 3 that I think we can learn from Samson's story tonight is, again, God is faithful. God is faithful. Each week we have seen, as horrible as the things get in Judges, we are reminded that God is faithful. And this message is throughout the entire Old Testament and New Testament. Hebrews chapter 10, verse 23 says this: let us hold tightly without wavering to the hope we affirm, for God can be trusted to keep his promise. God is faithful. Do you know what is incredible in Samson's story? That even though the people did not ask for help, God was still faithful to them. They broke their promises, but God kept his. This is not just the end of the story, though. Just as God intervened for them, he continued to work in his people to deliver them eventually and to provide a way to salvation through Jesus Christ. And I'll say this tonight and we're done. God has promised to save you. He has already died on the cross to give you a way to salvation. Nothing will stop him. Nothing has stopped him. And you cannot blow it too big or fall too far. He is faithful. He will keep his promise. God is faithful. Let's pray.